Hello, welcome everyone to the Engineers Week 2022, prepping for a wonderful session coming up. My name is Thea Saar, and I am the Deputy Executive Director at Discover Engineering. And for those of you who are new to us and don't know much about Discover Engineering, we're the folks that do our Chats with Changemakers show, the Future City competition for middle school students, the Persist series, our series of monthly conversations with women in engineering, and Engineers Week, of course, and Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day. But what we're really all about is connecting volunteers, educators to creating shared engineering experiences for students to help spark that interest and that engagement. And also celebrating the work of engineers and technologists and technicians and how they make our world a better place. And tons of free resources for you all, STEM activities, trainings, careers, posters, artwork, and we're going to talk all about that as the session goes on today. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box or the chat. My colleague Ellen will be monitoring that, and she'll make sure that she either addresses them in real time or brings them up to our panel. So Engineers Week, I just said this, it's really a time to celebrate engineers in the field and engage students in engineering. And every year we have a theme, and this year's theme is reimagining the possible in this lovely, vibrant graphic, which is available for download, and you can use it in your outreach efforts. And when you registered, we asked you a couple of questions. The first one is how are your Engineers Week and Girl Day plans coming along? And a lot of you haven't started yet, and that's okay. Whether your outreach happens during Engineers Week, you know, that February 20th to 26th period, or it happens all year long, every day is a great day to celebrate engineers and engage kids and girls in engineering. You're also really interested about how others are doing outreach, what resources you can use, and ready-made opportunities. And some of you have been hampered by COVID. I think a lot of us have been hampered by COVID, and we'll address that as well. So I'm going to ask my two panelists to join me today. First, Simone Waleninsky from Gateway to the Great Outdoors is joining us, and Suba Tholador, who is a parent volunteer. And you're going to learn a lot from Simone and Suba. I've had wonderful conversations with them leading up to this, so I know you're in for a treat. So as we're going to start, and Suba and Simone are going to tell us a little bit about themselves. So Simone, can you tell us about yourself and share a little bit about Gateway to the Great Outdoors?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today. So thank you for the introduction, Thea. My name is Simone, and I have an educational background in Africana Studies and Education, and a professional background in, Africana Studies in the Environment, and a professional background in education and nonprofit work. Currently, I am the Education Director at GGO, or Gateway to the Great Outdoors, which is an environmental, outdoors, and STEAM education nonprofit organization currently based in St. Louis and Chicago. We work with low-income communities and partner with Title I schools to provide hands-on, inquiry-based STEAM curriculum to grades 4 through 8, and we have plans to expand to a high school program within the next year as well.
Nice. All right. I'm going to share my screen again, and so we can see the next question, which is for Suba, which my screen is not advancing. I apologize about that.
I'll go ahead and start anyway.
Yeah, go ahead and start anyway. Yeah, tell us about you and your volunteer efforts and what we're looking at.
Yeah, I think I started out pretty much like most volunteers. My kids were in school, the teacher asked for some volunteers, and I raised my hand. And that's how it started. And as I progressed, as I became more comfortable after a couple of years, I noticed that there were a couple of other things that the teachers just didn't really feel they had time for. And so I approached them with some ideas, and they were generally receptive. And I approached the PTA for some other ideas, and it just grew from there. Educationally, my background is I have a biology degree and a master's in business administration. But similar to my volunteering efforts, changing as whatever door opened, my professional career also did the same.
Great. Well, so we're going to get into it. And the first thing we're going to talk about today is we're really going to dive into how do we support a student's STEM identity. And we're going to break this session up into three areas. But when we think about supporting a student's STEM identity, how do we help them nurture an interest in and a positive attitude towards STEM? How do we help them see the value in STEM and how it aligns with their personal goals? How do we build their confidence or give them the chance to build their own confidence in their own STEM skills, providing a strong support network and helping them feel a sense of belonging? We know from research that Discover E has commissioned that these and others, that these factors, when we bring all these together, that's when students actually start to develop and build and grow their STEM identity. So those are all great things to know, but how do you put them in practice? How do we as volunteers, we as educators, what's our role in that? And that's really going to be the conversation today. So our formula for success is really positive engineering messages. What we say matters, and how we say it is actually really important. Doing those hands-on activities and doing those hands-on engineering activities are really key. Letting the students lead their own learning. Sometimes that gets a little hard and get a little messy, but it's critical. And then how do we develop those interactions and bring together that STEM volunteer with the educator to introduce the student and let them see either a near peer, someone, in high school, someone in college, someone working, so they can kind of start to picture and imagine their own future. All right. So first up, this is the most fascinating piece of research that we found, and it was back in the early 2000s, and it still holds true today, which is kind of sad. But most students and a lot of Americans just don't know what engineering is. They're getting a better sense of STEM, they're getting a better sense of science and technology. But when we really start talking about engineering, they're kind of like, what is engineering? And our definition of an engineering is that engineers and technicians and technologists work with other smart people to design and create things that matter. And we have found that when we really emphasize the creativity of engineering, that engineering is about teamwork, that engineers make a difference. When we say that I'm an engineer and I designed satellites that help detect drought around the world, and that's important so we can figure out our water resources. So if we paint that larger picture of what engineers do and how they do it creatively and do it in teams, then we can have a much more important impact. So I'm going to ask Suba and Simone, how do you talk to students about engineering? And if you only had a short period of time, what would you emphasize?
I'll go ahead and start.
Good.
So when we talk to kids about engineering, in my most recent position, I was working in a STEAM lab at a local school. And engineering is hard to define because it's so all-encompassing in so many fields. But what we do tell the kids is engineers are the people who think of creative solutions to things that they face every day. And when we highlight certain products that engineers had key input on. So for example, I remember one kid, we took in the Blue Lizard sunscreen bottle that chemically changes color when it's exposed to UV light. And the kids were like, that is so cool. So we try and bring in products that have relevance to their daily lives and explain to them that this is what an engineer develops somewhere along the way.
Awesome. Yeah. And I would say similarly, trying to explain such a large topic can be difficult in a short period of time. Most of our class sessions are only 50 minutes. So we're definitely trying to fit as much as we can in there. And we try to do that through as much hands-on activities as we can. So we have, wind turbine building and solar oven building where students will do that as an activity in class and actually have an experience doing engineering in class and being engineers in class and feeling, you know, more connected to the action, which can kind of explain more all of the many things that engineers do that we might not have a chance to delve into in that one session.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's fascinating. Many, many years ago, I worked on a project called Design Squad, and we had the activities, but we didn't ever tie in the what engineers do part. And at the end of doing the hands-on activity, kids were sometimes left with, I still don't know what engineers do. So sometimes when you pick an activity, if you can think about that activity and how it relates back to a real world challenge, then you can easily weave in what engineers do, how they do it, and you build that content over time. It's not, you know, one and done, but it definitely helps. So and
it does also when, so for example, we try and tie it in, we talk about shoes. We tell the kids about, you know, when you're looking for a shoe that has better traction on field day, that'll help you grip the ground a little bit better. You know, and we talk to them about an engineer designing that, or the fabrics that allow your sweat to be off your body. We talk to them about so we really try and tie it tightly to something that they recognize as opposed to a really big concept. And the other thing that we really try and do is when we do projects, we allow them to customize their projects as much as they can. So we have an activity for them, but we always try and incorporate some sort of decorate or add features that doesn't necessarily have anything specifically to do with the project at hand, but it allows them to have that creative outlet to know that they don't have to follow the template, but they can also add their own.
Yeah. So, and I'm just going to go back because what you talked about right there was, you know, building their confidence and helping them see the value and how it aligns with their values and goals, right? And you know, nurturing their positive attitude. So everything, it's kind of all woven in together. How we talk about it, what we let them do, and how we let them lead the way and put their own personality into it is so important. So I have done whole 90-minute workshops on how you talk to kids about engineering, and we've only talked about it for 5 minutes this morning. So we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. But if you go to discovere.org, there's a section on the top nav called volunteer or teach. So if you're an educator, you can go to the teach section. If you're a volunteer, go to the volunteer section. And we talk about the engineering messages and how you can share them. And it's, you know, messages about making a difference, creativity in STEM, the teamwork, and then curiosity is so important. But there's videos on here, there's tips for how you can talk about it. So go ahead and explore that when you get a chance. If you're kind of like, I want to know more about how I talk about engineering, there is more to learn. So the next up, the hands-on activities. I always, you know, this is really I'm like the meat and potatoes or the tofu and the vegetables if you have a vegetarian in your home like I do. This is really where the action happens, literally and figuratively. And so I'm curious to hear from Simone, how do you select your activities, and do some work better than others?
Absolutely. I think our focus is definitely the most fun and most engaging way to communicate the STEAM curriculum that we have set out. So, you know, with the solar ovens, having, you know, the lesson be constructing these ovens, and then at the end of the lesson being able to make s'mores in the ovens and enjoying them with the class, and, you know, having that connection to, okay, well, this is what we're going to do when we go on our camping trip at the end of the semester, and, you know, making it something that the students are excited about, something that they're looking forward to, and that definitely varies from lesson to lesson, and it can be a trial error thing sometimes. But, you know, as many teachers know, curriculum is ever evolving and, you know, always changing. And so if something worked better in one class, then we're going to say, okay, well, we're definitely going to keep that for the next time. And just, you know, being flexible and never being stagnant in, you know, an activity that may have worked really well last year, but now we want to change it and try something new and keep it, keep it fresh, keep it engaging, and try to make the students have the highest quality lesson every time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm going to come back to something you said, but I want to hear from Suba about, selecting activities, from a parent perspective. How did you find them, or what resources did you go to, and what did you look for when you were first kind of pulling up different activities?
Well, that's a good question, because as a parent volunteer in schools where money isn't readily available for these kind of activities, the parents that I know, we started out collecting our recycle, and I set up a bin in my garage, and anytime some kind of interesting spool-like or straw-like item came in some sort of packaging that we opened, we just throw it in the bin. And then I asked other parents to do the same, and we bring our bins in. And so our projects were actually somewhat limited in that we didn't have a great amount of any one thing. So in the beginning, we really started with much more open-ended kind of projects, like ones where we would tell everyone to develop their own mascot. We'd put out all the stuff and we'd say, build a mascot. And then the second step of that mascot was, hey, this mascot needs to get from home to school. And we put a piece of tape, which was our biggest expense, by the way. Tape cost, we had to buy so much tape. And we put 2 pieces of tape on the desk, and we said, your mascot's got to get from here home to school, figure out a way to get them there. And so some kids would go the car route, some kids would go the, fly them over with a spoon on a catapult. And so that allowed them to develop something. And so all of our initial projects were tape, really was our biggest expense. After that, though, once we saw the positive effects of having these events, we went out and started looking for grants, and that really helped us again to find activities. So, for example, there was a group called IEEE in this area who ran a big camp, and so we asked to borrow some of their nicer stuff. And so we ran a classroom, and they let us borrow it, which was so kind of them. I was a little worried that, my students would mess them all up, but they didn't. And so we had the opportunity to access those. But the activities that we really try and pick are ones that have minimal direction. We don't want to sit there and lecture at them. We really wanted things that they could run with. So in the beginning, our sessions always start with some sort of an eye-catching something. I stand up there and I do something, might be a little dance even, that really catches people's eye. And then we really give them an overall view, but we don't want them to have step-by-step directions. We want them, because one, we would need too many adults to do that. The STEM lab really focused on kids from kindergarten up through 6th grade. And especially at that kindergarten level, there's just so many kids who need help, especially even tearing the tape, that we couldn't do those kind of events that needed a lot of direction. So we had to build more open-ended questions. And your website actually was one of the ones that I went to, the Discovery website. It is an incredible resource for ideas and things to do. But there were many others that we looked at. We looked at the Dyson Foundation website. Theirs are very clearly spelled out. NASA had some. I felt they were a little too detailed for the grade levels that I was working at. They seemed more middle school oriented. I was at there were definitely a couple of others that I looked at, but there's so many resources out there. It's really about finding what fits within your budget, what kind of resources you have available. But I do emphasize that we would pick ones that needed minimal direction or adult involvement until much later. And then once we had a core group of adults who would come every time, we'd be able to pick those that needed more adult hands-on input.
Yeah. No, and I just want to underscore what Simone and Suba were saying about when they pick their activities, that open-ended, not very, really student-driven. It's really about, is the activity following the engineering design process? Are we asking the kids to identify the problem and you kind of learn the specs, right? And we can do that really quickly and then let them go at it, brainstorming solutions, designing, going through this process. And the activities that are more recipe based, where it's like, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, here's step 4. There's not as much learning for the kids because they're not exploring, they're not growing. And that's the beauty of an engineering activity, right? You're taking your pre-knowledge and you're applying it to designing your solutions. So when you're picking activities, is it a demo or hands-on? And usually we say hands-on all the way, right? But sometimes in this new virtual world, we might need to do some more demo activities. Like there might be a place again for those demos, and you really have to think about what your environment is. But I think the 3 biggest pieces when you're looking at activities is there a purpose to the activity? You know, the solar the solar oven that Simone does with her kids is fabulous because it's not just saying, hey, take this apart, or hey, you know, do this. There's a bigger societal purpose that you can bring in. There's a way that you're making a difference. You know, with a solar oven, you can talk about climate change, or you can talk about people who might not have consistent access to prepackaged electricity, for lack of a better way to describe it. Does it follow the design process? And do you have an opportunity within that activity to weave in different messages about engineering, about creativity, about problem solving? So before we go on to the next question, Simone, I want to go back to you for a minute and ask you your thought process or how you think about activities in a virtual setting versus an in-person setting. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny that you were talking about a demo of the virtual setting, because we're really trying not to do that and still trying to keep it as hands-on as possible. And so we've been really lucky to be able to have virtual programming where the students are still in class together this year. Whereas last year, that was not the situation because everyone was virtual from home. So that's been such a help. And we've been able to, you know, still drop off the materials that we would want to use for those hands-on activities. And, you know, we have university mentors running our lessons. So they'll have materials on the other side of the screen, and then the students will have materials in the classroom, and they're still able to do that activity together. And I mean, it could be kind of like a demo, like here, I'm showing you what I'm doing, but students still have the opportunity to be, you know, touching and exploring and engaging their senses in a way where other virtual environments might not permit that. And when we were working in those virtual environments where students were at home and were not able to have, you know, that team base in the classroom, we were still trying to give materials for them to have those hands-on experiences, even if we wouldn't be the ones there leading that lesson or, you know, doing that demo. So they would still have the opportunity to explore and, you know, build their curiosity and gain that exposure. So that's, one thing. But I mean, the other side of that is virtual is, there are challenges, certainly. And personally, I think that in-person programming is much, much better. It can be more engaging. I think students can get more out of it, but you know, we're not using that as an excuse to not deliver the highest quality programming we can to those virtual classes. So just trying to engage students visually and using more kind of like technical aid than we would in the classroom, where we're kind of like no screens, no computers, where we just want to be engaged and hands-on. So kind of cheating there a little bit, but really just trying to accommodate the space that we're in to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and I think 2 points, it's like the pre-conversation between the volunteer and the educator is always important, right? So that you are talking, what do the kids know? What goals and objectives do you have? What materials do you have? What do we need to provide? And yet becomes even more important with if you as a volunteer or an educator, if you invite someone into your classroom to pipe in like we're doing with you all right now, that kind of more virtual way, having that pre-conversation so that the person in the classroom or the after school, the leader in the room knows what the activity is all about and can be your your helper on the in the room where it happens, and that you provide the activities and the materials in advance, right? So that you have a team. What's your role as the person kind of coming in virtually if you can't come in person? And like I said, Engineers Week is a state of mind. It is February 20th through the 26th, is always during George Washington's birthday. But if, Omicron or other things are happening in your community and you want to do it in April or May or over the summer, every day is a great day. So you can just gauge what's comfortable for you and what resources you have in your area.
Yeah, could I add to that? And I wanted
Yeah.
to, I have not done anything virtual because once the school shut down, the STEAM lab shut down, but we had received some UC Davis and Little Bits was doing a study at that time, and they had given us kits, Little Bits kits to use in the STEAM lab. And because the school shut down at that time, we had these kits, we wanted to use them, and we thought about delivering the kits to a set group of students and having them work with them online. But what we ultimately did was set it up with a local Girl Scout troop. Actually, it was 3 Girl Scout troops. And we met with them in a park. Everyone was masked. We set 2 people at a table far apart. And I just did the session standing in front, far away with my mask. And we walked through the Little Bits, it's circuitry sessions. And then they'd come back the next week and we'd do another session. And it was a 2-week session. And it worked out really well. So even though we didn't do it virtually, I think, you can look at other options like doing it outside in a park, spread out, or we thought about each kid bringing their own blanket, sitting on their own blanket, and then spacing their blankets a certain distance apart. But there are other ways to get around it. In terms of virtual, I will say that my children are involved in a program called Medical Explorers. And the one great thing about virtual is that they've been able to bring in experts from all around the country to speak to these students. And they had a coroner come in, speak, and yes, it is a lot more lecturing, a lot less hands-on, but the people that they're able to bring in to share is just a much broader net than they'd ever been able to cast before.
Yeah. Now, just for full disclosure, Suba is in LA. So going to a park is more of a 360 for her than it is for Simone in Chicago or me in Boston. We've all learned the power of the heat lamp this year. So just one thing is on the screen is finding STEM activities. This is discover.org. We have a ton of activities. We have videos, we have hands-on activities. Each one, we've just revamped our website. So there's a couple of new things you can do when you go on our website. If you open an account, you can click favorite. So you can start to collect those tried and true activities, and they're always just available there for you. And we've also have live links to the career that goes along with it. So making a cell phone is, I can't read that because it's too small and I don't have my glasses on, but could take you back to an electrical engineer and the various topics. So I'm going to pause for 1 minute and ask Ellen if there's any questions for either Suba or Simone that have come in that we'd like to address at this point.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. This first one is from Michael, who just asked the panel to comment on the benefits of STEM activities on general early childhood development. And he goes on to say, we know that there's great benefits for, fostering interest in STEM as a career, which is great, but what about just on general early childhood development?
This, I think, we've thought about a lot in our environment, because specifically we notice a trend as you get into the older grades where kids suddenly think, I'm not good at it. So they kind of give up and don't try. And even as the classes come into the STEAM lab, you can see kindergarten kids, they are full of energy, they want to try. And then by the time you get to the 6th graders, they're actually incredibly hesitant they almost have to be drawn out, and they almost always ask for what do I do next? What do I do next? Not because they're not capable of following the directions, but because they're so used to being led at that point without the creativity aspect of it, they don't know what to do. And so I feel that the STEM education is incredibly important, starting at a very young age. It allows these kids to see that it's not moving only towards taking a test or getting the right answer. It's about being okay with not getting the right answer, failing at what you're doing, and getting ideas from other people on your team to make it better. Because you're never going to achieve perfection. You're getting better with each iteration. And kids along the way, I think, lose that. And it's important to make sure they keep it, start it when they're young, and keep it going forward as they age.
Simone, anything to add to that?
Very well said. Yeah, I was just going to say we're working with that exact age group, that 4th to 8th grade group that's kind of, you know, married to, okay, this is what I know what I'm supposed to do. This is how I've been, you know, socialized in school thus far. And so there is some, you know, peeling back the layers needed and, you know, rebuilding that confidence. And especially, you know, unfortunately, STEM is still such a gate kept, you know, field. And so I think a lot of students can feel insecure. But I would also say that, you know, in a different way than like an early education setting, which I have worked with preschool before, you know, 3 to 5-year-olds, and that excitement is unparalleled, absolutely. But I do still see that same excitement and just having that exposure and having the materials and the opportunity to explore. I think at any age it can be encouraging, but definitely is way more helpful to start young, so you don't have to do those extra steps to be like, wait, remember this is exciting, this is fun, it doesn't have to be right, you know, just explore and discover.
And
I
that's,
agree.
yeah, and that's the beauty of the engineering design process, because to Suba's point about having it open-ended and being an exploratory, you can start that with a 3-year-old, right? And it's just the questions and it's just the materials you're giving them, and you up the ante as they get older. You know, I have a classic activity. I ask people, give them a piece of paper and they have to build a bridge that can hold 100 pennies. And the kindergartners are always like, I can totally, they dive in, they do it. They don't even question anything. And you know who gives me the biggest grief? The structural engineers. They're like, they're like, I don't build bridges. I can't do that. Anyway, all get stuck in that mindset of, I don't have all of that background information. And if we could start really young and get them exploring and get them comfortable and get them ready to dive in and to give them permission to keep doing it as they age, then everyone will be comfortable with the paper bridge activity. Ellen, any other questions?
Just one more on messaging, asking, this is from Pamela, asking about the resources that I know, Thea, you pointed to on discovery.org, but perhaps there are others as well, in terms of talking to parents and the influencers of young students.
Mm-hmm. We are actually really excited to announce that we're going to be doing a follow-up this year on Messages Matter and talking to students now and their parents about engineering what they think about it and what messages resonate with them and with their parents. So we're going to have new resources at the end of this year, the results of that research. And then hopefully we'll be able to parlay that into how you talk to parents and how you talk to parents of a Latinx family, or how you talk to, if there's any differences, to a different kind of families, or also students who may want to go into a 4-year degree, or students who might want to go into a skilled trade right away after high school, because you know, STEM really runs the gamut. So we're look for that coming up shortly. All right, I'm going to move us along, because again, we can talk all day about each and every one of these pieces. But doing those engineering activities, it's really a chance to develop their confidence, promote their interest in STEM, help them build that identity and see the value. So the next piece we're going to talk about is the interactions with STEM professionals, the role models. And this was some fascinating feedback that we got from our annual survey, where it said, where we heard from educators that their students don't have that many opportunities to meet an engineer or technical professional. And yet the engineers and the educators, volunteer says, that's what helps them learn about STEM careers, right? That's really where the meat is. That's where it's all happening. So for you educators out there, start inviting people into your classroom. For you and your after school programs, for the volunteers, think about what communities you can reach out to and work with. And I'm going to ask Suba to go first. And Suba, I really want you to share because Suba won a small grant from Discover E, and I want you to share kind of how that idea came to pass. I think it's such a great one. I'll let you talk more.
Let me start by saying the connecting students with the STEM professionals is so incredibly important. And that enthusiasm does come back when they see people doing it who are excited about their jobs, sharing what they do. In the specific case that Thea is talking about, I served on a district advisory council and heard about this program that our district was doing. It was outreach to Spanish-speaking parents, and they had set up a conference. It's been running now for about 6 years. And what they built in with the conference was childcare, so that parents could bring in their elementary school students and eventually their middle school students. And they had asked for parent volunteers to come and help manage the room. And they had enough people who had volunteered for the elementary school students, but not enough for the middle school students. So I went in and I brought in some of the games that we had from Lunch Lab, but mostly I just saw kids sitting there on their phones. And I looked around the room and I thought, these kids are there. It's a captive audience. Their parents are in the conference. We could really make use of this time, because in a school day, it's actually quite difficult for a teacher to separate themselves from everything they have to get done to bring a kid over to an enrichment class. And the following year, we volunteered to actually run hands-on activities. And what we did was we had them build those balloon-powered cars, and we made it into a competition where we give them a general idea of how to build a car. We talked about the science behind why it works. We had them build their cars, had them test them out on their own without competition with anyone else's, redesign based on what they saw maybe at their neighbors, and then actually ran in heats of 3 or 4 competition and narrowed it down. And again, the same thing, this was middle schoolers, and in the beginning they were hesitant, and there were a couple of kids causing a little bit of a ruckus in the back of the room, and I just went over to them and I said, thank you for volunteering, for being our first people to test their vehicles in front of everybody. And they came up, but by the end, the enthusiasm for running their cars and being a victor was very high. And it's really these opportunities that you may not see to introduce those kind of ideas. But in terms of bringing in those STEM professionals, one of the ways that our school has done is really not sending out an email to parents. I mean, we do this. We send out an email saying, hey, parents, if you'd like to come and talk about your job, we'd love to have you. But really reaching out specifically to those parents who we know have positions that we'd like our kids to hear about. We had a medical device salesperson who brought in a pig's heart, and the kids were totally enthralled. And then we had another man who works on aviation systems of some kind, and they thought that was super cool. And then we had one mom who works in Amgen. She works in a lab here, and she brought in some really cool. So seeing these people in their community working in these fields, sharing their knowledge, really made a huge difference. And as I mentioned before, IEEE does hold an annual conference, but there are for girls to come and work on tech, and that sharing that information was very helpful. There's also our Thousand Oaks library. Our library here runs a bunch of activities, and we called them in to come and share. So they do those stomp rockets. So kids, they have the template. The kids can cut out their little rocket, tape it up however they do it, decorate it however they want, and then they take it out and try and shoot out. If it's not working, they come back in and redesign it. But when other people come in and say, hey, we're excited about this and we want to share it with you, the kids naturally feed off of that.
Yeah. And the one thing is, a lot of people say, well, where do I find the kids, right? Or I'm having trouble getting into the school, or I'm having trouble getting into the after school. And what Suba did is found a ready, an opportunity where the kids were just sitting there waiting, there was dead time to fill, and no one had thought to fill it with a STEM activity, right? And I think that was just like genius and so clever, but so many of those opportunities are happening around the country, where the kids are there. How do you interject a little bit of fun and engagement with them? So just, when we saw that, we were like, wow, that's so awesome. Simone, I'm going to ask you, because you have your classrooms and you have your volunteers and you've made those connections. How do you train or talk to volunteers before they go work with kids? What are some important things as we think about volunteers as role models for them to be aware of and think about?
Absolutely. So we have, I wouldn't say it's a rigorous training process, but I would say we try to make the mentors as comfortable as possible with the fact that they're just going to have to kind of let go and surrender of all of the anxieties that come with anticipation. Am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to do, is it going to be engaging? Am I going to be able to connect? And kind of just encourage them really to be present in the classroom, be present in the activity. So something that we really encourage is our mentors do the activities with the students. So we have the WOW acronym, with, over, watch. So doing the activities together, making those connections, writing this line between teacher and friend. And it's just like a very perfect role for them to play at that time for so many students who are discovering something new. And especially, working with low-income communities, and then having university volunteers from, prestigious universities. We work with WashU, we work with SALU, we do work with SALU, we work with U Chicago and Chicago as well. And so just encouraging mentors to, have a critical consciousness when they're in the classroom, and have that critical consciousness while doing STEM activities. And I think that's something that's so important to remember regardless of the environment that you're in, regardless of the, content that you're teaching, especially in STEM, which needs more Black and brown people to be, making these discoveries and doing this work. And so just encouraging our mentors to not make the activity exclusive in any way, and being inclusive in every way that they can, as far as like what to talk about. Sometimes people are worried, like, am I going to say the right thing about, this person's family structure or something like that. And we're saying, okay, well, maybe if you have a concern about that, don't bring that up, and let the student lead the conversation. Let the students fill whatever space you're worried about filling, because they absolutely will. They're excited to share. And especially when you, get them doing something with their hands, it just flows naturally for them. And so kind of feeding off of that energy for the mentors is something that we teach in our training before the classroom. And then, of course, the best practice is being in the classroom with the students and building those connections. And, after the third or fourth session, they're best friends. And, it's not that you don't have to do work for that to happen. It's just something that comes about naturally.
And if you want to learn more about kind of the ins and outs of being a role model as a volunteer, go to the volunteer section of discovery.org. There's a lot in there about what you can do. How can you be an active listener? I think, Simone, you basically, you have to be your authentic self, but be an active listener for the kids to bring you in, right? And be aware of hidden struggles that some kids, that kid in the back of the room who's causing trouble. Think about them, how can you engage them? Can you make them a helper, right? Because they, or can you go talk to the, the leader in advance and just say, are there any kids who might need some extra hand holding? But if you're your authentic self, they'll appreciate that. And they're going to, and you have to be prepared for left field questions. High school kids might just, one might blurt, how much do you make? Or if you're dealing with kindergartners, they might ask if they can brush your hair. Because that happens to me all the time, and I don't even have good hair. So, So yeah, you just be be open and be available. And because when you are, and also for educators, we have the same, how are you a role model in STEM, right? If you're a teacher, you are still a role model in STEM, your curiosity, your openness to learning, letting the students lead. It's all there for you to kind of explore more. But, connecting kids with that excitement and enthusiasm for STEM does all of these things, right? It, helps them see the value, develops, creates their own autonomy if they're leading their own learning, and developing their confidence. So I'm going to skip that for a minute because we're running out of time, which we always do. But I'm sure it's a question out there that Ellen's been working on, but we always get it. Okay. How does a volunteer, a parent volunteer or a STEM volunteer find teachers and youth leaders? And we have a whole section on the website on setting up class visits and offers tips for that. And also for you educators who are on the call today, how do you find volunteers? And there's a couple of great ways, programs like Simone's, but Suba's also mentioned IEEE. There's also Society of Women Engineers, National Society of Black Engineers, Society of Hispanic Engineers, your local universities, your local engineering firms. If you call them up and say, hey, do you have any, your local college, do you have any students that might be interested in coming, call the engineering department or call the science department. They actually do have those programs and they're eager to either come out to your classroom, your after school, or your library, or your museum, or whatever, wherever you are. So it's just about finding those people and making those connections. And all of these ideas are on our website. You can just do a search for, classroom visits, and it'll pop up the right page if you can't find it right away. Oh, here it is, right here. See, I got ahead of myself. Inviting a STEM professional into your classroom. There's a whole training there, or setting up a virtual and in-person visit, just different tips on what you might want to do. So before I wrap up with a few other things people can do, Simone, what advice do you have for people doing outreach for the first time, or educators doing engineering in their classroom for the first time?
I think just to throw yourself into it. I think there's a lot of, is this the right thing to do, or is this the right connection to make? For us, we're on the phone, we're sending emails all the time, just throwing out an option like, would you be interested in working with our organization? Would you be interested in coming into the classroom and doing a visit? People will not respond or, say no, but it's kind of just with so much out there, so many resources out there. I think starting somewhere, starting small and, trying to make those connections, interpersonal connections to communicate the content that is so needed in classrooms right now, as far as STEAM and engineer-based curriculum.
And Suba, what advice do you have for that parent out there, or they want to make a difference in their kids' classroom? Or
I think everyone is stretched for time. So my advice really is start small. Don't think that, it has to be the biggest and the greatest. Even an hour of your time makes a big difference. If you say to the school, hey, could I get a couple of parents come in and run just a lunch lab where kids are playing with toys, and I talk to them a little bit about, hey, look at this structure. What if you did this? What if you did this? I remember we had these straw building things that like Tinker toys, but bigger, and kids enjoyed playing with those. Well, if you had some sort of a background, maybe you could talk a little bit about how to make it better, or what about trying this, or just sit there and build your own, and kids will look over and be in awe of whatever you're doing, or you'll be in awe of what they're doing. So I think asking people specifically, would you be able to give me an hour of your time, come to the school, and what we'll do is show the kids how to build paper boats, and we'll add pennies onto it and see if it sinks, and you can talk a little bit about your background in whatever that may be, while the kids are doing their activity. So I think starting small and remembering that it doesn't have to be perfect. It's better just to do something that engages a kid, because they have such a limitless curiosity, and they want to learn and they want to hear from people, and they just don't have that opportunity. Even at a more basic level, if you just want to donate, the Home Depot and Lowe's kits, they sell them for $5, and the kids build things, right? And everyone gets a little kid hammer. Well, I guess you have to bring your own hammer now with COVID, but they build little structures with nails. And when we did that, so many kids had never actually used a hammer and a nail to build something. So even the smallest activity, you may not think, oh, well, everyone has done this. Well, in truth, a lot of kids never have that opportunity. And so you giving that 1 hour really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And, the starting small, and don't do it by yourself. There's other, collaborate with somebody who wants to help. You don't have to do it by yourself. And that's my miniature poodle who decided to chime in. So sorry about that. 10 pounds of aggression. So more on Discover E, right? So just really want to really encourage you to go and check out the website if you haven't already. We have our Engineers Week page under Engage, and it has all kinds of promotional resources from social media graphics to ads and posters. You can download all of this. We have our Girl Day page. There's more info on being a role model there, how you can, easy things that you can do, the 5 easy things that you can do for Engineers Week or Girl Day, and we'll be loading those up soon. Here's some of those social graphics. Here is the hashtags that you can use. Really shine a light on. The chat was going crazy with different things that people are doing around the country. Don't keep it to this chat. Share it on Instagram. Share it on Facebook, and link with us, and we'll give you some love back. And finally, some ready-made, right? What are those ready-made opportunities? So we have, if you're not familiar with it, our monthly chats with changemakers. We have an 11th grader, Tiffany, who interviews a different engineer each month. It's completely free. It's a half hour. Next month, she's going to be meeting with a mechanical engineer, a half-hour conversation on what her life is like as a plant manager and what's involved in that, how she got involved. And then they do a quick, I'll give you a heads up, mechanical hand activity at the end. She gives the video instructions. During Engineers Week on Girl Day, we're also going to be doing another chats where Tiffany is going to be talking to a NASA engineer and an engineer from Northrop Grumman who worked on the just successfully launched James Webb Telescope. So that's going to be really fun, and a very exciting chat. And then if you're looking for a ready-made volunteer opportunity, you can volunteer as a future city judge. February 5th is our international finals, where the top 45 teams from across the country and Canada and China will be competing for finals. And it's about 6 hours where you are just going to have your socks knocked off about how these kids are thinking of the future. And we're always looking for more judges. And then Persist series, which is our monthly conversation for women and their allies in engineering. And we're kicking off our new season with talking about how you go from surviving to thriving in engineering. All of these are free, and you can get more at discovery.org. So, Ellen, we have 5 minutes. I wanted to save it. Any other burning questions that we need to get in at the last minute from our audience?
Yes, there are a few I'd like to sneak in here. One is piggybacking on what the slide you just showed, asking about chats of changemakers and the time, noting that the 2:30 current Eastern start time doesn't work for the live chat with this particular school because it's dismissal time. And we hear that it's hard to have the perfect time that suits everybody for the live. We always record the interview, so you can always watch them after the fact. But that said, the one on February 24th on Girl Day, featuring the 2 engineers from James Webb, is at noon Eastern. So that might be one that will work better, and for to join us live. as far as, let's see, oh, actually, this is a great question. I've seen a few times now. And I'm not sure if we've had this before, Thea, but asking, the chat is so rich, as I think we've all seen, with resources being shared. Could this transcript possibly be shared with folks after the fact? I think we could do that, couldn't we?
I think we can. I think we can. We'll just look into it. Everyone who registered will get a follow-up email with a link to the video. We can provide the slides to people like those, and we can pull out. We'll clean up the chat because it could get a little messy, but we can definitely share all of those resources. Give us a few days as we bang away on that list.
Yes, we can sift out the hellos, as nice as they are, and stick with the resources. That'd be great. And here's a question from Ivan, asking about any guidance on how to approach concurrent sessions for students and parents. For instance, if you have students, say, working on a hands-on activity while parents attend an information session in Spanish, maybe. So any thoughts on that about, just good guidance for planning those sorts of events?
Well, the conference that I had alluded to before is set up that way. So the parents go into information sessions while the kids are provided breakfast and lunch, and then have playtime, essentially. And it works out very well that way. We are also looking at these sessions where parents and kids interact on STEM activities together, especially in the younger grades. So that way, that brings us the adult we need to involve in the activities that have a lot of directions involved. But it also allows the family unit to develop skills and not feeling there has to be a right or wrong answer, and being able to just work on their project together. And so I think there's benefits both ways. I think both can be worked out really well, depending on what activities you bring in. But for activities where you have parents in a separate informational session, you definitely want activities that the kids can generally run on their own.
Simone, any advice or?
Yeah, I really like what you said about having joint activities for families in general, and we try to do community events rather in both cities multiple times a year. And so upcoming we have our science carnivals, and so we have different booths, and there's something it's family oriented, and it's meant for all ages. But I think that there can be things where, okay, I know that there are people here who are well versed with working with young children, so I feel comfortable leaving my children at this science activity, and now I'm going to go and learn more about something else over here. So doing something like that with a community event where you have people who can cater to both parties is also something that we do in our organization, and it can be a good way to start small, kind of like what Suba was saying earlier as well.
And I know that the Society of Women Engineers, they do a big event every year where they have the parents in one room and the girls in the other room, and they send the parents home with the instructions and extra materials. And then they say, hey, ask your kid to show you what they did today and lead you through the activity. So the kid becomes the teacher. They can share what they're doing. And all of a sudden you get to see, to Suba's point, there's no right or wrong. And the kid is kind of walking you through, again, putting them at the center and letting them drive the conversation. I think we have time maybe for one more short question, Ellen. Anything else?
I was just going to say there aren't any here in the Q&A, but I think there might be some that are looking in the chat. And so as we go through those, if there are any that we didn't address today, we can follow up with folks if there's any that we didn't get to here. As usual, Thea, you anticipated some of the questions that came in, so that was helpful.
We always try. Well, I just want to thank Suba and Simone for joining me today and for everything that they do to engage kids in engineering and share their love and enthusiasm for STEM with kids around the country. So thank you both. It was a really wonderful conversation. And for all of you that joined us, thank you for everything you're doing. And we hope that this gave you a few ideas and check the boxes. Go to discovery.org. And if you have any questions, you can send them either to thea@discovery.org or to info@discovery.org. I manage both. So they'll both get to me. And if you want, if you have any specifics for Simone or Sube, you can send them to me and I can forward them to them. So thanks. Have a great Engineers Week, a wonderful Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day, and a fabulous rest of your Thursday. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.